Part 1, The Record begins. Today we have a story about silence, survival, and the particular cruelty that hides behind closed doors and respectable names. This account was found among water-damaged ledgers in a Charleston courthouse basement, written in fading ink on pages that someone clearly wished to destroy. What follows is a chronicle that time tried to erase. If you enjoyed this story, consider subscribing and becoming part of our community. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. We love hearing from our amazing viewers all around the world. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're listening from and the exact time right now. We're deeply interested in knowing how far and at what times of day or night these documented stories that time tried to erase reach. The record begins in the spring of 1808 in Charleston, where the air hung thick with salt and honeysuckle, and where certain houses on certain streets operated by rules that were never spoken aloud but always understood. The woman's name was Dinah. She worked in the kitchen house behind the Chronicle estate, a three-story manor on Church Street with white columns and black shutters that never seemed to need paint. She was 24 years old, small-framed but strong, with careful hands and a face that rarely showed what she was thinking. She had been born on the property. Her mother had been born there too. The man's name was Isaiah. He was 27, tall and broad-shouldered, with a quiet voice and eyes that took in everything. He worked the stable, the garden, and whatever heavy labor the household required. He had been purchased 6 years prior from an estate in Virginia after the previous stable hand died of fever. They had been married in the only way that mattered to them, standing together under the old live oak behind the quarters one Sunday evening while others sang. No paper, no permission asked, just a promise made in front of witnesses who understood that some bonds were deeper than any law. The widow Cantrell had been mistress of the house for 3 years since her husband's sudden death from what the doctor called apoplexy. She was 41 years old, thin as a nail, with pale skin and hair the color of steel wire pulled back so tight it made her temples ache. She had 3 daughters, Margaret, 20 years old, Elizabeth, 18, and Caroline, 16. All 3 were unmarried. All 3 were running out of time. The household ran on schedules that never varied. Breakfast at 7, dinner at 1, supper at 6. The widow inspected every room each morning at 9, running her finger along mantels and windowsills, checking for dust that was never there. She kept a small leather notebook where she recorded everything: expenses, rations, tasks completed, infractions observed. Dinah had learned the rules early. Never speak unless spoken to. Never look directly at the mistress. Never let the fire go out. Never let the bread burn. Never, ever let anything run short. Isaiah had learned different rules. Be visible when called, invisible otherwise. Move quickly but never run. Keep your head down. Keep your thoughts to yourself. Speak only when there is no other choice. They were careful. They were always careful. But that spring something changed. It started with the way the widow watched Isaiah when he came to the back door to collect kitchen scraps for the hogs. Her gaze would linger half a second too long. She began inventing reasons to call him to the main house: a shutter that did not need fixing, a floorboard that did not creak, a window that opened perfectly well but that she claimed was stuck. Dinah noticed. She said nothing. The daughters noticed too. Margaret, the eldest, would find excuses to walk past the stable. Elizabeth began requesting that Isaiah carry her parcels when she returned from town, though she was perfectly capable. Caroline, the youngest, would watch from the upper windows, her face pressed to the glass. One evening in late April, as Dinah banked the kitchen fire, she heard footsteps on the path. The widow appeared in the doorway, backlit by the last purple light of dusk. "Send Isaiah to the house," she said. "I need him to move a trunk in the attic." "Yes, ma'am," Dinah replied, eyes on the floor. "At 9 o'clock, not before." "Yes, ma'am." The widow left without another word. Isaiah did not return to their cabin until well past midnight. When he did, he said nothing. He lay down beside Dinah in the dark, and she felt him shaking. She took his hand. He squeezed hers once hard. Neither of them slept. The next morning, there was a new rule posted in the kitchen house, written in the widow's precise hand. Isaiah is not to leave the property for any reason without written permission. He is not to speak to anyone outside this household. He is available for house tasks at any hour, day or night, as required. Dinah read it twice. Her hands, still holding the broom, began to tremble. The summons came every 3 nights, then every 2, then nightly. Always after dark, always to the main house. Sometimes it was the widow who called him. Sometimes it was Margaret. Once it was Elizabeth, standing at the kitchen door with a lamp in her hand and eyes that would not meet his. "Mother needs you upstairs," she said softly. "She said to come now." Isaiah went. Dinah learned to recognize the sound of his footsteps returning. Slow, heavy, the walk of a man carrying something he could never put down. She would wait by the window, watching the path, and when she saw his shape emerge from the darkness, she would open the door without a word. He never spoke of what happened in that house. She never asked. But she saw the marks, scratches on his shoulders, bruises on his arms shaped like fingers. Once, a bite mark on his collarbone that took 2 weeks to fade. The widow's demeanor changed. She walked taller. She smiled at breakfast, a thin smile that never reached her eyes. She began wearing brighter colors, deep green, burgundy, a blue the color of a bruise. The daughters changed too. Margaret grew quieter, spending hours in her room. Elizabeth started attending more social calls, her laugh too loud, too bright. Caroline stopped watching from the windows and started appearing wherever Isaiah worked, standing close, saying nothing, just watching. One morning in June, Dinah was kneading bread when the widow entered the kitchen house. She had never done so before. The kitchen was Dinah's domain, and the mistress did not cross certain thresholds. But she crossed this one. "Your husband," the widow said, and the word sat wrong in her mouth, "is proving quite useful to this household." Dinah kept kneading. "Yes, ma'am. I have decided he will sleep in the tack room from now on. It is more convenient. He is needed at irregular hours." The dough stuck to Dinah's fingers. She pressed harder. "He has a cabin, ma'am. He has whatever I say he has." Dinah looked up. It was a mistake. Their eyes met for just a moment, and in that moment the widow's expression shifted into something cold and satisfied. "Do you have something to say, Dinah?" "No, ma'am." "Good. I would hate for there to be confusion about your place in this household, or his." The widow left. Dinah's hands were shaking so badly she had to stop working. She pressed them flat against the table, flour dusting her dark skin white, and she breathed slowly until the shaking stopped. That evening, Isaiah moved his few belongings to the tack room. One shirt, one pair of shoes, a wooden comb Dinah had made for him, a square of cloth that had been his mother's. He came to the cabin once more, after dark, when he thought no one would see. Dinah met him at the door. "I cannot stop this," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "I have tried, I have. I know. If I resist, she will sell me south. She has said so, or she will sell you. She knows," his voice broke. "She knows what that would do." Dinah took his face in her hands. "Then you do what you must to survive. You hear me? You survive." "Dinah." "You survive, and I survive, and we find a way. We always find a way." He pulled her close. She felt his heart hammering against her chest, felt his breath in her hair. "I am sorry," he whispered. "You have nothing to be sorry for." But they both knew that was not true. He had everything to be sorry for and no power to stop any of it. He left before dawn. 3 nights later, Dinah woke to the sound of crying. Not close. Somewhere across the yard, muffled and distant. She rose and went to the window. The main house was dark, except for one window on the second floor. The crying continued for an hour, then stopped. In the morning, there was blood on the steps leading to the widow's room. Not much, just a smear, like someone had tried to wipe it away and failed. Dinah scrubbed it clean. Her hands did not shake this time. Summer arrived with heat that pressed down like a hand over the mouth, thick and suffocating. The days stretched long, and inside the Cantrell house, the air itself seemed to hold secrets. Isaiah no longer returned to the cabin at all. Dinah would catch glimpses of him in the yard, hauling water or splitting wood, his movements mechanical, his eyes distant. When their gazes met across the distance, there was a whole conversation in that glance. I am here. I am alive. I have not forgotten. But something was draining out of him, day by day, like color leaching from fabric left too long in the sun. The widow's daughters were changing too. Margaret, the eldest, began wearing loose dresses. She walked with one hand pressed to her stomach and refused to come down for breakfast. The widow would send Dinah upstairs with tea and dry toast, and Dinah would find Margaret sitting by the window, staring at nothing, her face pale as milk. "Are you unwell, miss?" Dinah asked once, setting the tray beside her. Margaret turned slowly. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Do you ever wish," she said softly, "that you could simply disappear, just stop being?" Dinah's throat tightened. "No, miss, I do not. I do every day." She turned back to the window and said nothing more. Elizabeth, the middle daughter, grew manic. She threw herself into social engagements, attending every church function, every tea, every quilting circle. She returned home flushed and exhausted, laughing too loudly at things that were not funny. But at night, Dinah would hear her packing the floor above the kitchen house, back and forth, until the early hours. Caroline, the youngest, simply vanished into the house. Dinah would go days without seeing her. Once, passing the locked door to the late master's study, Dinah heard weeping from inside, low and hopeless. She did not knock. One afternoon, an older woman came to call. Ruth, a free black woman who ran a laundry service in town and sometimes brought linens to the house. She was 50-some years old, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, and she had a way of seeing things others missed. When the widow was occupied upstairs, Ruth found Dinah in the kitchen. "That man of yours," Ruth said quietly, folding a sheet with practiced hands. "He all right?" Dinah's jaw tightened. "He is alive." "That is not what I asked." "It is the only answer I have." Ruth was silent for a moment, her hands moving in steady rhythm. Then, "I have seen this before. Not often, but I have seen it." "Seen what?" "White women with power and no husband and too much time." Ruth's voice was barely audible. "They take what they want, they always have, and there is no law that will protect a man like Isaiah. You know that." "I know that. But there are other things." Ruth glanced toward the door, then leaned closer. "Old laws, ones they forget about because they never thought they would need them. Property laws, inheritance laws, laws about legitimacy." Dinah's heart began to beat faster. "What do you mean?" "I mean that what they are doing in this house, what that widow is doing, it has consequences. Legal ones, especially if there are children." The word hung in the air between them. "Children," Dinah repeated. 3 daughters, all of a sudden wearing loose dresses and refusing food and looking sick as dogs. Ruth's eyes were hard. "You have eyes, child. You can see." Dinah could see. She had been seeing for weeks but had not let herself name it. "If those girls have bobbies," Ruth continued, "and if anyone could prove those bobbies come from Isaiah, there are laws about inheritance, about legitimacy, about what happens when a white woman bears a child by an enslaved man." She paused. "It is not clean, it is not simple, but it is a scandal the widow cannot hide, and scandals have a way of destroying people in this town." "How would anyone prove such a thing?" "Bobbies have faces, Dinah. Bobbies have features, and people talk. Servants talk. Neighbors talk. The widow can control many things, but she cannot control what people see with their own eyes. Ruth finished folding the sheet and placed it carefully on the pile. You are a smart woman. You will know what to do when the time comes, but you need to start paying attention. You need to start remembering dates, times, who went where, who called him when, everything. Why are you telling me this? Ruth's expression softened. Because I was young once, and I knew a man like Isaiah, and I did nothing because I thought there was nothing to be done. Her voice cracked slightly. I was wrong. There is always something. It may be small, it may take time, but there is always something. She left without another word. That night Dinah took a piece of charcoal and a scrap of paper she had saved from the trash heap. She began to write. May the 4th, called to house after dark, did not return until dawn. May the 7th, called by Margaret, sent to upper floor. May the 10th, called by widow, tack room locked from outside, could hear voices. She wrote everything she could remember, every date, every summons, every locked door and late-night cry and morning after. She hid the paper under a loose board beneath her bed. And she waited. 2 weeks later, the widow called all the household staff to the main parlor. It was unprecedented. The parlor was never opened except for guests. They stood in a line. Dinah, Isaiah, old Thomas who tended the grounds, young Abigail who cleaned the upstairs. The widow stood before them, hands folded, face composed. There will be changes to this household, she announced. I am pleased to inform you that my daughters and I will soon be welcoming new additions to our family. We expect blessed events in the coming months. No one moved. You will speak of this to no one outside this house. Do you understand? No one. Yes, ma'am, they murmured in unison. The widow's gaze settled on Isaiah. You have been most helpful during this time, she said. Most dutiful. Isaiah stared at the floor. Dinah stared at the widow. And in that moment she saw it clearly. The widow was not ashamed. She was not afraid. She believed she had won. She believed she had found a way to secure her daughters' futures, to give them heirs without husbands, to bend the world to her will. She believed no one could touch her. That night, Dinah added one more line to her hidden record. The widow is with child. Margaret is with child. Elizabeth is with child. Caroline is with child, all by the same man, all against his will. This is the testimony I will carry, if I must carry it to my grave. Autumn came cold and early. The leaves turned brown without bothering to be beautiful first, and a chill settled into the bones of the Cantrell house that no fire could chase away. The widow's condition was impossible to hide now. She wore shawls and stayed indoors, but her belly swelled beneath the fabric. Margaret was further along, her face drawn and gray. Elizabeth had taken to her bed. Caroline, the youngest, looked like a ghost haunting her own life. Dinah moved through her days in a kind of focused numbness, cooking and cleaning and keeping her record. She had filled 3 pieces of paper now, hidden in 3 different places. She did not know what she would do with them. She knew only that they must exist. Isaiah had stopped meeting her eyes entirely. She would see him in the yard, moving like a man underwater, and she understood that something inside him was dying. Not his body. His body was being kept very much alive. But the part of him that had laughed, that had held her hand under the oak tree, that had whispered promises in the dark, that part was going silent. One night in October, Dinah woke to the sound of screaming. She ran from her cabin toward the main house, her heart hammering. The screaming continued, high and terrible, and lights blazed in the upper windows. She burst through the kitchen door and found chaos. Thomas was there, and Abigail and a white woman Dinah did not know. A midwife, she realized, with blood on her apron. "Get water," the midwife shouted. "Hot water now." Dinah ran to comply, her hands shaking as she stoked the fire and set pots to boil. The screaming went on for hours. When dawn came, it stopped. Margaret had delivered a son. Dinah saw him only briefly. A tiny, red-faced thing with a shock of dark hair and skin that was not quite white, not quite brown, but something in between. The midwife wrapped him quickly and handed him to the widow, whose face was unreadable. "He is healthy," the midwife said carefully. "Strong, he will live." The widow looked down at the baby. For a long moment she said nothing. "Then his name will be William Cantrell." "Yes, ma'am." "He is my grandson, do you understand? My daughter's son. No one will question this." The midwife's expression flickered. "Of course, ma'am." But Dinah saw the woman's eyes. She saw the calculation happening there. The midwife knew. Of course she knew. Any fool with eyes could see. The widow turned to Dinah. "You will help care for the child. You will tell no one about his birth. If word spreads beyond this house, I will know it came from you." "Yes, ma'am." "And if it does, your husband will be sold before sunset. Do I make myself clear?" Dinah's throat closed. "Yes, ma'am." The widow swept from the room, the baby in her arms. Dinah stood in the kitchen, hands still dripping water, and felt something crack open inside her chest. She found Isaiah that afternoon, alone in the stable, sitting on a bale of hay with his head in his hands. She knelt in front of him. "Isaiah." He did not look up. "Isaiah, look at me." Slowly he raised his head. His eyes were empty. "Did you see him?" he whispered. "Did you see the baby?" "I saw him. He has my hands, my mouth." His voice broke. "He will grow up calling her grandmother and never knowing that his father is." He could not finish. Dinah took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Listen to me. You are going to survive this. We are both going to survive this." How do we survive this?" "I do not know yet, but I am working on it. I have been documenting everything. Every night they called you. Every." "Dinah, stop." He pulled away. "Stop. There is no documentation that will save us. There is no law that will protect us. We are property. That is all we are. That is all we will ever be." "No." "Yes." He stood, his whole body shaking. "I have given that woman and her daughters 4 children. 4, and there is nothing I can do about it. There is no court I can go to, no person I can tell. If I resist, I am sold. If I run, I am hunted. If I fight back, I am killed. Then we find another way." "There is no other way." His voice echoed in the stable, too loud, and they both froze. Somewhere in the distance, a door closed. Isaiah sank back onto the hay bale, his rage collapsing into despair. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I am so sorry, Dinah. You deserved a husband who could protect you, who could be a man, and I am." "You are a man." Her voice was fierce. "You are a man, and what is being done to you is evil. Do not let her take that from you too. Do not let her convince you that you are anything less than human." He looked at her with eyes full of grief. "I do not feel human anymore." Dinah pulled him close, and he buried his face in her shoulder, and he wept. She held him and said nothing, because there were no words for this kind of pain. When he finally pulled away, his face was wet but his voice was steadier. "What are you documenting?" he asked quietly. "Everything, dates, times, who called you when, who was present, everything that can be verified." "For what purpose?" "I do not know yet, but Ruth, the laundry woman, she says there are laws, old laws about inheritance and legitimacy. If those bobbies are proven to be yours, it creates a scandal. It creates questions. It creates problems for the widow." Isaiah shook his head. "Even if that is true, who would believe us? Who would believe 2 enslaved people over a white woman of property?" "I do not know, but we have time. The bobbies are here now, more are coming, and bobbies have faces, Isaiah. They have features that cannot be hidden. People will see, people will talk, and when they do, we will have a record." He was quiet for a long moment. Then you are braver than I am. No, I am just refusing to die while I am still breathing. He almost smiled, almost. That night, Dinah added to her record. October the 14th. Margaret delivered a son, dark hair, features clearly mixed, midwife present, witness, myself, Thomas, Abigail. The widow claims the child as legitimate. This is a lie. 2 months later, Elizabeth delivered a daughter. In January, Caroline delivered twins, a boy and a girl. In February, the widow herself delivered a son. 6 children in 4 months. All of them with dark hair, all of them with features that looked like Isaiah's. The house filled with crying bobbies and exhausted women, and a silence that was more terrible than any scream. And Dinah kept writing. Winter held Charleston in a grip that year, unusual and bitter. Ice formed on the water buckets each morning, and the wind cut through the cracks in the cabin walls like knives. Inside the main house, the bobbies cried at all hours. 6 infants requiring constant care, and the widow had severely miscalculated the demands. She hired a wet nurse from town, a young white woman named Mary who came with references and left within a week, her face pale and her hands shaking. I cannot stay in this house, Dinah overheard her telling the widow. Those children, the way they look, people will talk, ma'am. They are already talking. Then let them talk, the widow snapped. You were hired to nurse, not to gossip. I was hired to nurse white children, ma'am, and I am not certain that is what these are. The widow struck her across the face. Mary left that same hour and never returned. The widow turned to Dinah. You will care for the children, she said. All of them. You will feed them, clean them, keep them quiet. You will have help from the girls, but you are in charge. Dinah looked at the 6 bobbies, some sleeping, some crying, one staring at her with dark eyes that looked exactly like Isaiah's, and felt a weight settle onto her shoulders that threatened to crush her. Yes, ma'am. So she became mother to 6 children who were not hers, born of violence against the man she loved, and she cared for them because they were innocent and because she had no choice. Isaiah was not allowed near them. The widow had made that rule explicit. He is not to enter the house anymore. He is not to see the children. He is not to speak to them. If I find he has violated this rule, he will be sold that same day. So Isaiah worked outside, and Dinah worked inside, and they became strangers living in the same small world. But Ruth returned. She came in March with a load of linens and a purpose in her step. She found Dinah in the kitchen, exhausted and covered in spit-up, with a crying baby on each hip. Lord have mercy, Ruth said quietly. I have none left to give, Dinah replied. Ruth took one of the bobbies, little William, the oldest, and began to rock him with practiced ease. He quieted almost immediately. How many now? Ruth asked. 6. And how many people in town are pretending not to notice? All of them. Ruth's mouth tightened. That is about to change. She reached into her bag and pulled out a newspaper, folded to a specific page. She handed it to Dinah. It was a legal notice, posted by a lawyer in Charleston named Daniel Foster. The notice was calling for testimony in inheritance disputes, specifically cases involving questions of legitimacy and bloodline in matters of estate succession. Dinah read it twice. I do not understand. That lawyer, Ruth said, he is new in town, came from Philadelphia. He does not care much for the way things are done here, and he has already made enemies by taking on cases that other lawyers will not touch. She paused. He has also been known to work with free black people, and in one case he represented an enslaved man in a complicated property dispute. How do you know this? Because I do his laundry, and I listen. Ruth's eyes were sharp. That man is looking to make a name for himself. He is looking for cases that will challenge the order of things. And what is happening in this house, what the widow Cantrell is doing, it is exactly the kind of scandal that would interest him. Dinah's heart began to beat faster. But how would we even approach him? I cannot leave the property. Isaiah cannot leave the property. And even if we could, why would he believe us? You do not need to approach him yet. You need to be ready for when the opportunity comes. Ruth shifted the baby to her other arm. Keep your records. Keep documenting everything. And when the time is right, when the scandal cannot be contained anymore, that is when you act. When will that be? When those bobbies get old enough that people cannot pretend anymore. When the widow tries to register them with the church. When she tries to claim them as legitimate heirs to the Cantrell estate. Ruth's voice dropped. And when someone with standing in this community decides they have seen enough. Who would do that? I am working on it. Over the next weeks, Ruth became a regular presence in the house, always finding reasons to visit, always listening, always watching. And slowly, Dinah began to understand that Ruth was building something. A network of witnesses, people who had seen, who knew, who might be willing to speak if the moment came. The midwife who had delivered Margaret's baby. The shopkeeper who provided fabric for the children's clothes and remarked on how dark-complected they seemed. The minister's wife who had called on the widow and left looking disturbed. The neighbor who had seen Isaiah being called to the house at odd hours. None of them would testify against a white woman of property under normal circumstances. But these were not normal circumstances. One afternoon, Dinah was hanging laundry when a carriage pulled up to the house. A man stepped out, well-dressed, perhaps 40 years old, with gray at his temples and a leather case under his arm. Daniel Foster, the lawyer. Dinah froze, her hand still on the wet sheet. He was led into the house by the widow herself. Dinah could not hear their conversation, but she could see through the window. The widow sitting very straight, her hands folded, her face composed. The lawyer taking notes, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp, missing nothing. The bobbies were in the parlor, all 6 of them in their cradles and chairs, on display like prizes. The lawyer looked at each one in turn. Dinah saw his expression flicker, just for a moment, but it was enough. He stayed for 20 minutes, then left with a polite bow and a promise to return. The widow closed the door behind him and stood very still for a long moment. Then she called for Dinah. "You are never to speak to that man," the widow said. Her voice was tight. "Do you understand? If he returns and tries to ask you questions, you are to say nothing. You are to come to me immediately." "Yes, ma'am." "He is here about the estate, about inheritance matters. It has nothing to do with you." "Yes, ma'am." But Dinah could see the fear in the widow's eyes. The lawyer's visit had rattled her. That night, Ruth appeared at Dinah's cabin after dark. "The lawyer has questions," she said without preamble. "He has been hired by a distant Cantrell relative who wants to contest the estate. They have heard rumors about the children. They want to know if those children are legitimate heirs. And if they are not, then the estate goes to the relative and the widow and her daughters are left with nothing." Ruth's expression was fierce. "The lawyer will be back. He will start asking questions. He will want to see records, documentation, proof. And when he does, you need to be ready." "Ready how?" "Ready to tell the truth, all of it." Dinah felt dizzy. They will kill Isaiah or sell him, or... They might, but if you do nothing, what is his life now? What is your life? Ruth's voice softened. "This is a chance, Dinah. Maybe the only one you will get. It is dangerous, but doing nothing is dangerous too." Dinah looked down at her hands, scarred and calloused from years of labor. "What would I need to do?" "Keep your records safe. Be ready to hand them over if asked. And find someone on the inside, someone from the house, who might be willing to testify. The daughters will never testify against their mother." "Not the daughters," Ruth paused, "but maybe the midwife, maybe Abigail, maybe Thomas. Find out who is tired of carrying this secret. Find out who might crack." After Ruth left, Dinah sat in the darkness of her cabin for a long time. Then she rose, pulled out her hidden papers, and began to write a summary. A clear, precise account of everything that had happened, written in the careful hand her mother had taught her. She finished just before dawn. And for the first time in months, she felt something other than despair. She felt the small, dangerous spark of hope. Spring came again, and with it, a change in the air. The lawyer returned 3 more times. Each visit made the widow more agitated, her control slipping in small but visible ways. She snapped at the daughters. She questioned Dinah's cooking. She walked the halls at night, her footsteps echoing in the darkness. The Bobbies were growing. William, the oldest, was nearly 9 months now, and his features were becoming impossible to dismiss. He had Isaiah's eyes, Isaiah's brow, Isaiah's mouth. The other children were following suit. Dark hair, dark eyes, skin that tanned easily in the sun, features that did not match the pale Cantrell bloodline. People in town were talking. Dinah knew because the deliveryman had started making comments. The grocer's boy had asked, "How many young ones you got in there now, Dinah?" with a smirk that made her want to strike him. The seamstress who came to fit the daughters for new dresses had stared at the children with unconcealed shock. "My," she said carefully, "they are. Distinctive looking, are they not?" The widow had shown her out quickly. But the damage was done. The gossip was spreading. One afternoon in April, Dinah was in the kitchen when she heard raised voices from the parlor. She moved quietly toward the door, staying out of sight. The widow and Margaret were arguing. "I cannot do this any more, Mother," Margaret was saying, her voice high and strained. "I cannot. People look at me. They whisper. They know. They know nothing. They know everything. They see William. They see his face. They see," her voice cracked, "they see what you made us do. I made you secure your futures. I gave you heirs when no man would have you. You gave us shame." Margaret's voice rose to a shout. "You gave us children by a man who is enslaved, who had no choice, who you—" She broke down sobbing. There was a long silence. When the widow spoke again, her voice was ice. "You will compose yourself. You will stop this hysteria. And you will remember that everything I did for this family. You did it for yourself." The slap was loud enough to echo. Dinah closed her eyes. That evening, as she was putting the children to bed, Abigail appeared in the doorway. The girl was barely 16, small and quiet, and she had been working in the house for 2 years. "Miss Dinah," she whispered, "can I talk to you?" "What is it?" Abigail glanced over her shoulder, then stepped closer. "That lawyer that keeps coming, he talked to me today, in the garden. He asked me questions." Dinah's heart sped up. "What kind of questions?" "About the Bobbies, about when they were born, about—" She swallowed hard. "About Isaiah, about where he sleeps and who calls him to the house and when." "What did you tell him?" "I did not know what to say. I was scared, so I said I did not know nothing about nothing." Tears filled her eyes. "But Miss Dinah, I do know, I have seen, I have heard things, and it is not right. What they doing to Mr. Isaiah, it is not right." Dinah took the girl's hand. "Abigail, listen to me. If that lawyer asks you again, you tell him the truth. Do you understand? You tell him exactly what you have seen." "But Miss Helen, the widow, she will be so angry." "Let her be angry. The truth is the truth." Abigail nodded shakily and slipped away. 2 days later, the lawyer returned with a magistrate. Dinah watched from the kitchen window as they entered the house. The widow met them in the front hall, her face composed but pale. "Gentlemen," she said coldly, "I was not aware we had an appointment." "No appointment needed, Mrs. Cantrell," the magistrate said. He was an older man, stern-faced, with a reputation for fairness. "We are here on a legal matter concerning the Cantrell estate and the legitimacy of potential heirs. My grandchildren are legitimate. That is precisely what we are here to determine." The lawyer's voice was measured. "We will need to see the birth records for all 6 children. We will need to speak with the attending midwife. And we will need to interview certain members of your household." On whose authority? On the authority of the court, ma'am. A formal challenge has been filed regarding the inheritance of the Cantrell estate. If you refuse to cooperate, it will not look favorable. The widow's mask slipped for just a moment. Dinah saw panic flash across her face. Very well, she said tightly. I will retrieve the records. While the widow was upstairs, the lawyer caught Dinah's eye through the window. He gave a small, deliberate nod. Dinah understood. He knew, and he was ready to listen. That evening, after the lawyer and magistrate had left, the widow called a household meeting. Everyone was summoned: Dinah, Isaiah, Thomas, Abigail. They stood in a line, silent and tense. Legal troubles are threatening this household, the widow said. Her voice was calm, but her hands shook. Lies and rumors spread by jealous relatives who want to steal what is rightfully ours. If any of you are questioned, you will say nothing. You will claim ignorance. You will protect this family. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am, they murmured. But Dinah saw Isaiah looking at her, and in his eyes she saw a question. She gave the smallest nod. His expression changed. Something that had been dead behind his eyes flickered back to life. That night, someone slipped a note under Dinah's cabin door. She unfolded it carefully. The lawyer will return in 3 days. He will ask to speak with you privately. Say yes. Tell him everything. I will be your witness if needed, Ruth. Dinah read it twice, then fed it to the fire. She sat in the darkness, her heart pounding, and made a decision. 3 days later, Daniel Foster returned. He asked to speak with Dinah in the kitchen house, away from the widow's ears. Dinah agreed. The lawyer sat across from her, his leather case open, a clean sheet of paper before him. Dinah, he said quietly, I am going to ask you some questions. I need you to answer honestly. I give you my word that I will do everything in my power to protect you and Isaiah from retaliation, but I cannot help if I do not know the truth. Dinah looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached beneath her apron and pulled out the folded papers she had been carrying for months. She placed them on the table between them. This is the truth, she said. The lawyer unfolded the papers and began to read. His expression grew darker with every line. When he finished, he looked up at Dinah with something like awe. You documented everything. I did. This is extraordinary. He carefully refolded the papers. With your permission, I would like to present this as evidence. Dinah's hands trembled. If you do, the widow will know I testified. She will. She will try to punish you, I know, but the magistrate is already suspicious. And with this testimony combined with what others have told me, I believe I can build a case that will force an investigation, a public one. And if you cannot, then we will have tried, which is more than most people in your position ever get the chance to do. Dinah closed her eyes. She thought of Isaiah, of the 6 Bobbies sleeping upstairs, of the future that seemed like nothing but more of the same horror stretching on forever. Use it, she said, use everything. The lawyer stood and offered her his hand. Dinah shook it and felt, for the first time in a year, like a human being with power instead of property without choice. The hearing was held in the Charleston courthouse on a humid morning in May, in a room that smelled of old wood and older sins. The widow arrived in her finest dress, black silk that rustled like dry leaves, her face composed and cold. Her daughters followed, Margaret with her head down, Elizabeth rigid as a statue, Caroline barely more than a ghost. Dinah and Isaiah were brought in through a side door. They were not allowed to sit with the white people, but were made to stand near the back, where they could see everything but were meant to be invisible. The room filled quickly. Word had spread. Half of Charleston's society women had found reasons to attend, their faces hidden behind fans, their eyes bright with scandal hunger. The magistrate called the court to order. Daniel Foster stood, and presented his case with methodical precision. He called the midwife first. She testified reluctantly but truthfully about the births, about the dates, about the appearance of the children. "Would you describe the infants as having features typical of the Cantrell family line?" Foster asked. The midwife hesitated. "Please answer the question." "No, sir, I would not." A murmur ran through the room. He called Abigail next. The girl was terrified, her voice barely a whisper, but she spoke. "I seen Mr. Isaiah called to the house, late at night, many times, all through the spring and summer and fall. The widow would call him, sometimes Miss Margaret, sometimes Miss Elizabeth." "And where would he be taken?" "To the upstairs rooms, sir, to the bedrooms." The murmur grew louder. The widow's lawyer objected, calling the testimony hearsay and inappropriate. The magistrate overruled him. Foster called Thomas, the groundskeeper, who corroborated the late-night summons. He called the seamstress, who testified about the children's unusual coloring. He called a church clerk who stated that the widow had been evasive when attempting to register the births. Then he called Dinah. She walked to the front of the room, acutely aware of every eye on her. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Foster handed her the papers she had written. "Are these yours?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Did you write them?" "I did." "Would you read the entry dated May the 4th, 1808? Dinah's hand shook, but her voice was steady. "May the 4th. Isaiah called to the main house by the widow after dark, did not return until dawn, found him in the stable the next morning. He was shaking and would not speak." She read date after date, entry after entry, a chronicle of violation that had been carefully hidden but never forgotten. The room was utterly silent. When she finished, Foster asked, "Dinah, in your observation, did Isaiah ever go to the main house willingly?" "No, sir." "Did he ever have the option to refuse?" "No, sir. He was told if he resisted he would be sold south, or I would be sold. We both understood what that meant." "So these encounters were not consensual?" "No, sir, they were not." The widow's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection! This is absurd. You cannot expect this court to entertain accusations based on the word of an enslaved woman against a respectable widow." The magistrate leaned forward. "Sit down, counselor. I will determine what this court entertains." He turned to Dinah. "Young woman, are you aware that bearing false witness is a serious crime?" "Yes, sir." "And you still maintain that everything you have testified is true?" "Yes, sir, every word." The magistrate looked at the papers in front of him. He looked at the widow. He looked at the 6 bobbies who had been brought into the courtroom as evidence, all of them with faces that told a story no words could hide. "I will hear from the accused," he said. The widow stood. She was trembling with rage. "This is a conspiracy," she said, her voice sharp. "A conspiracy by jealous relatives and ungrateful servants to destroy my family. Those children are my grandchildren, legitimate heirs. The accusations being made here are vile and unfounded." "Then explain," the magistrate said, "how 6 children born within 4 months all share such distinctive features, features that do not appear anywhere in the Cantrell family line." "I cannot account for the mysteries of God's creation." "This court is not interested in mysteries, madam. It is interested in facts." He gestured to Isaiah. "Bring him forward." Isaiah was led to stand beside the bobbies. The magistrate looked from his face to theirs and back again. The resemblance was undeniable. "Mrs. Cantrell," the magistrate said quietly, "I am going to ask you a direct question, and I suggest you answer honestly. Did you or your daughters engage in intimate relations with this enslaved man?" The widow's face went white. "I will not dignify that with a response." "Your refusal is noted." The magistrate turned to the lawyer. "Mr. Foster, what is your recommendation?" "I recommend a formal investigation into the legitimacy of these children and the circumstances of their conception. I further recommend that Isaiah be removed from the Cantrell household immediately for his own protection, and that he be given leave to testify without fear of retaliation." The magistrate nodded slowly. "This court finds sufficient evidence to warrant a full investigation. The children's legitimacy as Cantrell heirs is called into question pending further inquiry. As for the enslaved man Isaiah, I am issuing a temporary order of protection. He is not to be sold, transferred, or punished while this matter is under investigation." The widow stood so fast her chair fell backward. "You cannot do this." "I can, and I have." The magistrate's voice was steel. "This hearing is adjourned. The court will reconvene in 30 days. He struck his gavel. The room erupted. Women gasped and whispered. Men argued. The widow stood frozen, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. Dinah found Isaiah in the chaos. Their eyes met across the room. He was crying. So was she. Ruth appeared beside them, her hand on Dinah's shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually did it." But Dinah knew it was not over. The widow was cornered now, and cornered creatures were the most dangerous. That night, as Dinah lay in her cabin, unable to sleep, she heard footsteps outside. She rose and opened the door. Isaiah stood there, his face illuminated by moonlight. "They are saying I might be freed," he said, his voice broken with disbelief. "Foster says if the investigation proves what we have testified, the scandal will be so great that the widow will have to sell the estate, and if she does, he knows people who will buy me and grant my freedom." Dinah pulled him inside. "Do not hope too much," she whispered. "Not yet." "I know, but Dinah," he gripped her hands. "For the first time in a year I feel like myself again, like a man again, because of you, because you refused to let this be forgotten." They held each other in the darkness, two people who had survived something that should have destroyed them. And they waited for the final blow to fall. The investigation lasted 3 months. During that time, the widow Cantrell's world unraveled thread by thread. The church revoked the baptismal records for the 6 children, citing irregularities and questions of legitimacy. The extended Cantrell family formally disowned the widow and her daughters, releasing statements to the newspapers that spoke of moral corruption and disgrace to the family name. The scandal consumed Charleston society. It was whispered in parlors and shouted in taverns. The widow could not show her face in public. Her daughters became ghosts in their own home, too ashamed to leave, too broken to stay. One morning in August, Margaret was found in the garden. She had taken laudanum in the night. They buried her quietly in an unmarked grave at the edge of the church cemetery, where the suicides and outcasts went. Elizabeth and Caroline survived, but barely. They would eventually be sent to live with distant relatives in Virginia, their reputations destroyed, their futures extinguished. The widow herself held on with grim determination, fighting every legal motion, contesting every claim. But the evidence was overwhelming. Daniel Foster had built an unassailable case, supported by testimony from multiple witnesses, by Dinah's meticulous records, by the undeniable evidence of the children's faces. In October of 1809, the court issued its final ruling. The 6 children were declared illegitimate and excluded from any claim to the Cantrell estate. The property was awarded to a distant cousin, a man from Virginia who wanted nothing to do with the scandal, and immediately put the house up for sale. As part of the settlement, Daniel Foster negotiated the purchase and manumission of Isaiah. On a cold morning in November, Isaiah stood in the courthouse and heard the words that changed his life. "You are hereby granted your freedom. You are no longer property. You are a free man." He wept openly, unashamed. Dinah, who had been granted her freedom in the same proceeding through Foster's advocacy and funds raised by Ruth's network of free black citizens, stood beside him. They were married again 3 days later in a ceremony conducted by a black preacher in a small church in the free black section of Charleston. This time, there was paper. This time, there were witnesses whose testimony mattered in the eyes of the law. This time, it was real in every way that the world could recognize. The widow Cantrell died 6 months later, alone in a rented room in the poor quarter of the city, abandoned by her remaining daughters, forgotten by the society she had tried so desperately to impress. The 6 children were dispersed. Some were taken in by distant relatives who would raise them as servants. Some disappeared into orphanages. Their fates were lost to history, as so many were. Isaiah and Dinah left Charleston in the spring of 1810. They traveled north with help from the network of abolitionists and free black communities that Ruth had connected them with. They settled eventually in Philadelphia, where Isaiah found work as a carpenter and Dinah as a seamstress. They lived quietly. They spoke rarely of what had happened in that house on Church Street, but once a year, on the anniversary of the day Isaiah was freed, Dinah would take out the old papers, the records she had kept, now faded and fragile, and read them aloud. Not to dwell on the horror, but to remember that even in the darkest times when the world tried to make them less than human, they had survived. They had borne witness. They had told the truth. And the truth, no matter how long it takes, has a way of surfacing. Archival note: this account was compiled from multiple sources recovered during the renovation of the old Charleston courthouse in 1972. Among the water-damaged documents found in a sealed basement room were court records from the Cantrell estate investigation, 1809. A leather-bound journal containing entries in a careful hand, believed to belong to Dinah. Letters between Daniel Foster and abolitionist organizations in Philadelphia. A fragment of a church registry from a free black congregation, listing Isaiah and Dinah's marriage in November 1809. The Cantrell house still stands on Church Street, though it has changed hands many times. Some say it is haunted. Some say they hear bobbies crying in the night or footsteps on the stairs when no one is there. But perhaps what haunts that place is not ghosts. Perhaps it is simply the weight of truth that was buried but never forgotten. The names have been preserved here so that what was done in darkness may be known in light, so that Isaiah and Dinah, who were made to be invisible, may finally be seen. This is their testimony. This is their witness. This is the record that time tried to erase but could not. If you enjoyed this story, consider subscribing and becoming part of our community. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. We love hearing from our amazing viewers all around the world. We preserve these forgotten histories so they may never be forgotten again. Remember their names. Remember their courage. Remember that resistance, even in its quietest forms, matters. The record is closed, but the story continues in every person who refuses to let injustice be forgotten.